I'm perfect, Peggy. I was no, Mauricio said that he had an exchange with a Muslim, you know. I'm glad that God gives me the opportunity to study what I'm studying and learning what I'm learning. This week I was with a friend, and he shared with me that he was in a relationship with a Muslim woman, and we entered into the conversation, and it gave me the opportunity to explain to him what we believe as a group, because he asked me. So I'm glad for that. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that I have a book in my hands right here. It's called, the author is Paula Fredrickson. The book is called From Jesus to Christ. Okay, a very good book. I'm showing you this book because what I'm teaching you is not something that I'm coming up with. It exists in academic circles, okay? And there's many books like this. And in this book, there's a chapter, which I like very much, in which she explains the historical, cultural background before Jesus was born and during Jesus' lifetime in order to understand what was going on in Israel in those days. So I'm happy to show you, and I have more books, but I'm happy to show you that there are people who are, studying. She's a teacher in Yale University in religious history. She's very good. So, if we recap what we spoke about last week, we said that the Torah gives us or God gave us everything we needed to know, with what God gave on Mount Sinai, we can know what God expects from us. And God clearly, is telling us that what He has given us, His teachings, His instructions, we have to not only live by them, but we have to make sure that we teach it to the next generation. Okay? We've learned also that we are not to add or take out from what God has given us. He gave us all that we needed to know. He gave it all on Mount Sinai. Now, this is a very hard pill to swallow for many of us because it doesn't leave room for much. And as human beings, we have a tendency to always want more. We are never satisfied with what God gives us. Remember, God told Adam and Hava, from all of the trees in the garden you can eat, except from one. And what did they do? They went for the one that they weren't allowed. Now God gives us instructions, and He says, don't add and don't take out from it. And what do? We have to add. Come on. This is not enough. This is our tendency, right? We always want to do the opposite of what God is telling us. And so people would say, okay, I understand what you're saying. You're telling me that God gave us on Mount Sinai His teachings. And after that, there's nothing else. Exactly. There's nothing else. But what about the book of Psalms? What about the book of Proverbs? What about 1st and 2nd Samuel? What about the prophets? Do we throw that all in the garbage? Of course not. We don't throw it in the garbage. We should study them and read them. But we should study them and read them knowing exactly what they are. And to understand what these books are, if we study history, it will help us understand why these books exist. The first thing we have to understand is that God never asked us to write other books. He never told us to write other books. We had the initiative, or the sages of Israel had the initiative to compile what was written in Israel, but never with the idea that God gave further instructions, more revelations. The reason why we have these books is because the sages believed that in these books we can find sabiduría, wisdom. There's teaching in these books. And if you read carefully these books, they're not teaching us anything new from what the Torah is teaching you. They're only amplifying what the Torah is teaching you. So, to come to these books and believe, like, for example, I was brought up in a Christian environment. And because of that, I was conditioned to believe certain things about the Bible. And of course, one of the things that I was conditioned to believe was everything that's in the Bible, and I used a word that is not it's not a rabbinical term, it's a Christian term, that every book in the Bible is inspired by God. Because, by the way, Jews don't talk this way. Christians talk this way. Okay, so all of the books after the Torah is inspired by God. They're divine. And because they're divine and because they're inspired by God, they have authority. We have to believe in them. We have to study them, and we have to live by them. This is how I was taught. But this is not what the Torah teaches us. So all of the other books in Tanakh, the rest of the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, all of the rest of the books we find in the Tanakh amplify the Torah. And they are part of Israel's history and richness. And we'll see later on when we reach the era of the Maccabees, how the rabbis perceive the books of the prophets. And you will see that what they understood from the book of the prophets and what we understand now, it's completely the opposite. Okay? Now, when we read these books, okay, let's just take an example. If you take the book of Proverbs, most of the book of Proverbs is speaking of Torah. Read the book of Proverbs and you'll find Torah everywhere. If you read the book of the Psalms, it's a compilation. It's a book today, but it's a compilation of different poems. And the book of Psalms is divided in 5 sections, just like the Torah, 5 books. Okay? And if you read them, you will notice it's talking about how God chose a king, and how this king and how Israel under this leadership prospered. But how sadly they deviated from God. And the end of the book of Psalms is God's faithfulness toward Israel. That's the book of Psalms. But we have given it a prophetic understanding. And so when we read the book of Psalms, we're not reading it historically, we're reading it theologically, and we lose ourselves. Okay? So every book has a reason, and the rabbis had the reasons why they permitted these books to be written and compiled. But never did they had the idea that these books would supersede the Torah. The Torah is God's revelation. There's nothing more. Okay? And this is what I wanted us to learn this morning, is that we're not telling you to throw away the rest of the books. In fact, we're not telling you not to study the Talmud or not to study the New Testament. I study the New Testament at least 2 hours a week. I'll tell you why. because my family is Christian. So my family has many questions. So I studied the New Testament in order to make sure to guide them to Torah. That's why I do it. And I try to make sure that I give them an honest answer, not a theological answer, but an historical, cultural answer to why we have these books and how to understand these books. Because my purpose when I speak to my family or anyone that's Christians is not to destroy their faith or their beliefs. I'm not there trying to tell them that they're wrong because they believe in this or that. My emphasis is what the Master did. In spite of the traditions and the beliefs that were in those days, he always directed the people to Torah. And I believe as a congregation, if you have the opportunity to share your beliefs, you can redirect them to Torah. It'll probably take time. Probably you won't be able to do it in one conversation. Maybe you'll have various conversations, but the idea is this. The idea is that we are not there to destroy your beliefs. We are there to bring you back to God, to have a relationship with God. And how we have this relationship with God, the more we study His instruction, His teachings, the more we grow in the presence of God. Shabbat Shalom.